Um, you know, I have a very special kinship with urbanists. Some years ago, when I was studying philosophy, I had to learn the hard way to leave my toolkits and skill sets inside the university auditorium. I used to ask my friends, can you prove that we are not in some sort of a mass hallucination? I mean, how can we know for sure that we're not in one, basically, if we have no way of trusting our own senses, right? My friends would go nuts, basically. What the hell did I try to tell them or even sell them in certain cases? Well, actually, when you propose similarly radical scenarios to maybe even prove a legitimate point, scenarios that are completely detached from our routines, inhibitions, experiences, and just general mundane reality, it's hard for the uninitiated to actually grasp what the hell are you aiming at. So basically, the question stands: how can those scenarios even be possible? But this year, we had a chance to see the worlds a lot of my beloved urbanists were fighting for a very long time. There was no more need to imagine cities without private cars. I mean, we could trust our senses, it was really happening, and we could prove that it was good. Why? Because we were living there, even if for a very short time. And in the age of personal incredulity, I mean, this was the killing stroke for all doubt. And what happened next? I mean, well, everybody who's anybody in urban and transport planning started talking, even if gingerly, about finding ways to sustain this new reality. And more people got the necessary tenacity to stand up and actually say, um, first thing we should do actually is kill all the cars. But what happened with this attitude now? I mean, because it seems that honestly we didn't do anything, right? This is the picture from last week, basically. And honestly, based on the news that we have now, I mean, Europe is almost at the same levels of COVID-19 infections as it was in March. Whilst, I mean, every single part of the world is basically pretty much back on the same levels of car usage we had last year. So maybe the only difference is we now have a congestion with masks on. And I mean, this situation will only get worse. So I mean, the question stands: what happened, right? What changed? Well, this tenacity to fight for the vision of the cities without cars. I mean, one that got its undeniable proof points this year got a bit confused, and not because it was unfounded or misinformed. Actually, it was because of very three distinct critical problems. I mean, first of all, most of the transport-related discussions we were tracking since March focused on user centricity. I mean, putting the needs and whims of individuals and not communities, actually, above all. Comfort and convenience are still the name of the game rather than network effectiveness. Plus, most of the attention during this period was given to discussing transport service provider business models rather than remembering that transport has an inherent hierarchy and we should actually take care of its base first. And honestly, we're still looking for some sort of a invisible hand to sort out our transport related inefficiencies. I mean, this is why we still hear these terms mobility ecosystem, as if there was an inherent harmony or some sort of a balance that we will necessarily reach. Sadly, we never do. And we never consider maybe isn't any harmony, or maybe the even term ecosystem is just plainly wrong. But listen, if we actually want to give the streets back to the people, reduce reliance on private cars, turn cities into walkable communities, and not just a collection of thoroughfares, we need to address all these problems at once. We have to rely, of course, on user experience design principles, but the end goal is not making trips better for a singular traveler, more comfortable for a single person. We have to actually aim for the whole mobility network to become citizen centric, one where you as a rider will understand how your choices affect the system and where you are incentivized to move sustainably and are deterred from causing negative effects of mass transit. Next, that kind of already suggests that we must remember what that mass transit actually is. I mean, we must put public transport first. And that actually should be the mantra for all transport nerds, not waiting for some electric connected and autonomous vehicles or even, I don't know, shared flying pods to save us all. And finally, I mean, the only organization that is actually aiming to why we elect city mayors and they shape the strategy for city administration. They aren't profit driven, at least they shouldn't be. They themselves should guide the mobility orchestration. So, all of those three things suggest that we need a solution that would allow people to move more sustainably, equitably, affordably, and reduce the strain that single occupancy vehicles cause. In other words, instead of owning a car, you need to have a master key to any car, bike, bus, or tram as a service, mobility as a service. But please notice that I am not talking about apps here. I mean, because you can have multiple apps, one app, multiple services, one service, they can overlap or they can be separate and disjointed. But the key thing, it needs to be grounded in public transport. I mean, we really need to relearn to love public transport again. It ensures the most effective, affordable, and sustainable option a mobility network can offer. Nevertheless, even if not a single COVID-19 related hotbed was associated with public transport, most of public and private organizations, and even the university I'm starting my studies at, everyone is actively discouraging people from using it, which is weird and short sighted. Next, in a lot of cases where public transport just doesn't make sense, and there are a lot of those, of course, additional mobility supply has to act as a supplement to it rather than a competitor. This is especially true with micromobility in high density and high access areas in city centers. So, a true mobility as a service cannot be agnostic or an ecosystem, if you will. There is a clear hierarchy, there's a clear relationship between these modes. And no fleet with 1,000 vehicles can compete with a system that has tens of thousands and carries millions of people every day. Finally, to actually build a truly equitable and safe mobility network, we need an entity to orchestrate it, one that by nature would not have profit as its main incentive, but rather would would focus on fair and affordable access to the whole mobility network, and that would be its main goal. So this is what mobility as a service actually is. It's not an app, it's a state that urban mobility networks reach. It's a state where you have an abundance of mobility supply, multiple multimodal services, maybe even for the same exact use cases. Either way, mobility as a service is an actual legitimate alternative to personal cars. And the first thing we should do, we have to remove the need for personal cars. And then I guess this can actually become a sustained reality. And honestly, I want to live in this reality. I hope you want to live in it too. Thank you.